Hello you lovely lot, my name is Max, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're doing something a little bit different. Normally during the week you get a match preview when Forest are playing their midweek matches. That being said, there aren't any this week. Unfortunately we're not playing until Friday night against Sheffield United, so I thought we would take on something a little bit different today and do a tier list. This tier list is going to be taking a look at every single Nottingham Forest manager since the year 2010. I needed a jumping in point for this video and I wanted to make it managers who I can feasibly remember their tenure and how Forest were during that period. So I thought 2010, when I was about 12 years old, would be a good starting point. It goes without saying, if you want to see me do managers from other periods in Forest history, the 2000s, the 90s, what have you, let me know down in the comments section below, and any other future tier list ideas you may have relating to Nottingham Forest. I do want to do a Nottingham Forest signings tier list, ranking some of our best and worst signings from the last 5-10 years or so. So if you've got any ideas for those as well, let me know in the comments section below and I'll definitely get on that. Before we get into it, of course, don't forget to drop a like down below and subscribe to the channel, turning on notifications so you don't miss a single video. Of course, the support, as I've mentioned recently, has been exceptional, and hopefully branching out and doing some different content will tick a few more boxes on this channel. And with that being said, let's get into the content and do this tier list and see where I rank every Nottingham Forest manager since 2010. Okay then, so here is our tier list. Here are our tier rankings. We start with elite, that is the best obviously, pretty good, meh, bad, and pub team manager. Unfortunately, because of the recent history of Forest, you could probably guess where a lot of these managers are going to be going. But hopefully there'll be some controversial opinions in here that you can have and argue about in the comment section down below. This covers from 2010 to now, so this is over the Nigel Doherty, the Al-Fawasi and the Marinakis eras of Nottingham Forest, and hopefully covers every permanent manager from those periods. We're not doing caretaker managers because it's not really fair to judge someone like Gary Brisdale over 3 games as manager, is it? Okay then, let's kick things off. Our first manager is Billy Davies. He is the only manager in this list who had 2 spells within this period we are looking at. One between 2009 and 2011 and one during the 2013-2014 season. One was pretty good. The first one, he got us back-to-back playoff finishes, signed some really good players in David McGoldrick and Lee Camp, and was generally probably one of the better managers we've had in the last decade and a half. And then he decided to come back to the club during 2013-14, and it just didn't, he couldn't recreate the magic that he had around the club. He didn't have that feel-good factor that he had around the club around the time, and I think it was kind of a tumultuous period of the club anyway. It was sort of the end of the Nigel Doherty era, and I think in general the club was in a bit of a mess anyway, or starting to sort of unravel slightly. I was going to put him in elite actually, before I realised he'd come back. I do remember that sort of 2-year period where he was, you know, back-to-back playoff finishes. We got to the, well, didn't get through to the final either time, but back-to-back playoff finishes, playing some pretty decent football, had a really interesting squad of players. But then I remember he came back and he went down from elite to pretty good, I think, on the basis of the fact that, that second stint, it just won it. Next up is a pretty weird one and also a very, very brief one. Steve McClaren, who had only just left Derby County, I'm pretty sure, if I can remember correctly, or he'd been to Holland or something when he came in to manage Forest. He came in, he managed us for a whopping 10 games. I believe he only won one of those 10 games, and it was not good. Had a really poor relationship with Nigel Doherty, which I feel that's not the first time I've said that today. And did make some decent signings. He did sign Jonathan Green in. He also brought Andy Reid back to the club during that January transfer window he's here. But he's going in pub team manager for me. I've never rated Steve McClaren. I never rated him when he was at Derby, when everybody sort of thought he was really good. Obviously, he was horrifically bad at England. Couldn't qualify, so I think it was for like 2008 Euros or something like that. And yeah, obviously came in to be Forest manager and didn't even look anywhere near the level. Really didn't look like he was into it, and obviously his ties to Derby didn't make anything better for him either. Okay, next up is the final manager of the Nigel Doherty era and the bridging manager between that era and the Al-Fawasi era. Between 2011 and 2012, we were managed by Steve Cotterill, who came into the club, had pretty mixed form as Nottingham Forest manager, didn't really achieve too much, but I will say he deserves a huge amount of credit for the way in which he handled the passing of Nigel Doherty and the transition in ownership with the Al-Fawasi family coming in and taking over the club. Obviously, that was a huge thing, the death of Nigel Doherty. He'd been in charge of the club for quite a long time, and obviously, as we saw at Leicester a few years back, it felt throughout the entire club, and it was a really dark period to be a Nottingham Forest fan. And obviously it's a shame, but I think Steve Cotterill did a really good job of handling the club, handling the game, staying professional, and deserves a huge amount of credit for the way in which he dealt with that. So with that being said, I think I'm going to put him in the meh category. I was going to put him in bad because his spell wasn't the best and it was pretty sort of inconsequential, but I think with the change of ownership and the death of obviously our owner and chairman, or former chairman, it was necessary for someone to just come in and stable the ship, and I think he did a fantastic job of doing that. And unfortunately, Steve Cotterill wouldn't last too long as Nottingham Forest manager. He would be pretty much automatically replaced by Sean O'Driscoll, our next manager on the list, who managed us in 2012. The Al-Fawassi family wanted someone to come in to play a good brand of football that will bring us up into the Premier League. And Sean O'Driscoll, during his time, I believe, at Doncaster, had a pretty good reputation for doing this. That being said, he didn't last very long, only around 5 months, managing us for 26 games. I've got it written down, his record: 10 wins, 9 draws, 7 losses. Pretty average, I suppose. At least he won more than he lost. But unfortunately, his tenure came to an end after a very strange interaction with the Hull City board. So the story goes that our owner and our board of directors were having a conversation with the owners and board of directors of Hull City, who I believe at the time were in the Premier League, or had at least just recently come down from the Premier League. And their belief was that to get into the Premier League, you needed a coach of Premier League pedigree, someone who had managed in the league previously, something Sean O'Driscoll hadn't managed. Therefore, off the back of that, the Al-Fawassi family decided that they were going to sack Sean O'Driscoll following this very brief interaction with the Hull City board. It gets worse. They wanted to sack him on Christmas Day, and it only took a last-minute sort of interaction between Chief Executive Mark Arthur and the Al-Fawassi family for this not to happen. If you needed a reason not to like the Al-Fawassi family, even less than we already do, this is one of them. I mean, the way they handled him, the way they handled his tenure was appalling. It was a shambles. In the press, it was just absolutely berated, and I think it was really the tip of the iceberg in terms of the time that they spent in charge of Nottingham Forest. And unfortunately, I don't think he really got the opportunity to show his talents. I think he was a quality manager. He came in with a decent reputation. Didn't have that Premier League quality that maybe some people wanted to come into the club, but I think he did pretty well under the circumstances. So I'm going to put him at the top of meh, probably around the same as Steve Cotterill. I think they probably both about managed the same, to be fair. So of course, as that story alluded to, the Al-Fawassi family wanted someone with Premier League quality to come into the club and manage us and take us eventually up to the Premier League. And the man tasked with that was Alex McLeish. And to say this was a dumpster fire of an appointment would probably be one of the understatements of the century. He only lasted 6 weeks, managing us for a whopping 7 games, in which he just won 1 game and 5 points in total, and left the club by mutual consent after that 6-week period between Christmas and February, I believe it was. And yeah, it was one of the worst appointments in modern Forest history. Someone who really didn't look like he wanted to be there, didn't really care, appointed because he had Premier League quality. So yeah, Alex McLeish, he's going in bad. He would go in pub team manager, but I think there's a special place reserved in that tier for someone like Steve McClaren. I think Alex McLeish is actually a decent manager, or he was at the time, to be fair. I just think, it wasn't the right combination of owner and manager, and he clearly didn't really want to be there, and obviously his tenure of 7 games wasn't the best. Okay, so we're jumping forward a little bit to 2014 after the disastrous second stint of Billy Davies and the hiring, or I suppose rehiring, of former player and coach Stuart Pearce. Psycho came into the club and managed us for 2014 and 2015. And one of the first things he did was actually sign one of the better players we had during that period in Britta Sombalonga, who bagged goals at championship level and would prove to do exactly the same for Middlesbrough. He managed us for 32 games. I feel like it was longer. It always felt like longer because we were playing some pretty awful football at the time. Winning 10, drawing 10, losing 12. Not the best record whatsoever. Under the circumstances, I think he did pretty well, although we did break our transfer record bringing in Britta Sombalonga. I was going to put him in pretty good, but I think we're going to put him in meh. But again, high up in meh alongside Cotterill and O'Driscoll, as under the circumstances, pretty good. In context of Forest, out of context, pretty shambolic if we're being honest. And his successor would be the man currently leading a revolution down at Selhurst Park, Crystal Palace's current sporting director Dougie Freedman. Of course, best known for making some pretty interesting signings at Crystal Palace, and did the same at Forest, made some good loan signings during a period while we were under a transfer embargo, and probably gave us the greatest period of stability we've had at the club since the early 2010s. Some of the signings he made during this sort of period of transfer embargo include Matt Mills, who was a pretty dependable centre-back for us during that period, Jamie Ward as well, who had a really good start to his Forest career after sort of them petering off following joining from Derby County. And he managed the club for about 57, 58 games. His record stands at 19 wins, 16 draws and 22 losses. Again, it's a negative record, but I think in the context of the time, especially considering transfer embargoes and things like that, a pretty good record all things considered. I think in the context of things, with the transfer embargoes, with the signings that he made, and probably with the actual record that he had as manager, I'm probably going to put him in the low ends of pretty good alongside Billy Davies. I think he got a bad rap at the time, but I think history will probably look back quite well on Dougie Freedman's time. Obviously, he played for Forest as well, so he had some credit in the bank like Stuart Pearce did. And I think he was pretty good as Nottingham Forest manager, particularly under the circumstances the club were under at the time. Okay, then we've got our first non-British manager in the list, and that is Philippe Montanier. He was, of course, appointed as the successor of Dougie Freedman, the permanent successor of Dougie Freedman, and I can remember vividly this appointment. I was about 17 at the time. It was 2017, 2018, I think it was he was appointed. So I was about 17 at the time, and I can remember distinctly his appointment and sort of feeling a sort of air of optimism. This is a guy who a couple of years earlier in 2012 had qualified for the Champions League with Real Sociedad as manager, so he obviously came in with decent pedigree. He just never really seemed settled. 30 games in charge as manager, just 9 wins, which is a less than 30% win rate, which is appalling as Nottingham Forest manager. And again, there was never really a clear identity. He never really seemed very settled, and I think his managerial record post Nottingham Forest speaks wonders. He managed 1 game for the France under-20s. He then managed Lens, where he was sacked, and he's currently the manager of Ligue 2 side Toulouse. So I think that speaks for itself. He clearly peaked at Sociedad and was very much on the decline as a manager when he came to Forest. Honestly, I can't look past putting him in pub team manager as a category. I think he was better than Steve McClaren because at least he managed us for 10 games. But his record was a shambles. It was appalling. We didn't have the worst squad at the time either. We were actually building a pretty decent squad, and the academy was producing some really good players at the time, and it just didn't work, did it? It was awful. Now we move into the final manager of the Al Hawassi era, the man who bridged the gap between this and the Marinakis era, the current era the club is in, Mark Warburton. Of course, a man who has a really good reputation leading into the appointment as Nottingham Forest manager, being promoted in the automatics from League 1 to the Championship with Brentford and finishing 5th in their first season in the Championship, their highest ever league position, and actually getting into the playoffs in their first season, which is very rare. You see a team promoted and then finish straight in the playoffs. He then went to Rangers, where he helped establish them back at the top of the Scottish Premier League, and came to Nottingham Forest, I would say, with a really good reputation. Again, this could be looking through the wrong lens. I remember at the time, again, being very excited by this appointment. Okay, Montanier's not worked. He was maybe not adapting to the language and the culture, but this is a British manager who's played for a really intelligent club in Brentford, gone to Scotland, had a decent record at Rangers, and is coming to us in our time of need. And it just didn't work. Again, I don't know why it didn't work. Well, I know why it didn't work. The owners were absolutely crap. It just didn't work. And he was only there for a few months. I feel, again, like the Stuart Pearce era. I feel like the Mark Warburton era was a lot longer than it actually was, but it really wasn't. He was there for less than a year. So I'm going to pop him in bad. And this is definitely a barometer of his time at the club, and less so as a manager. I think he's a really good manager. Did wonders at Brentford, doing great things at QPR. And I just think maybe the wrong fit for the club, and maybe wanted a bit more power than he was going to be allowed by the Hawassi family, and obviously was taken out of the club during the change of ownership. Next up, we have our third manager in a row who I was actually, again, pretty in favour of the appointment of, Aitor Karanka, the man who consistently got Middlesbrough finishing in the top 6 during his time and eventually would see them promoted to the Premier League in 2016. He made a total of 30 signings during his time as Nottingham Forest manager during his 2 transfer windows. And I could honestly make an entire video on this, like a where are they now, because some of them are crazy. The good include the likes of Jack Colback and Lewis Grabban, who have become very integral to the current Nottingham Forest setup. You've got the pretty decent in João Carvalho, who we broke our transfer record for and probably had his best stint under Aitor Karanka, as well as Tobias Figueiredo. And then you've got the utter crap of Hilal Soudani, Gil Diaz and Diego Goncalves. Honestly, the three of them were some of the worst signings we have made. Oh, just the crap that we signed when Aitor Karanka was in charge. He had a pretty average league record, 17 wins and 17 losses as manager, but did bring in some pretty integral players in Jack Colback and Lewis Grabban, who have gone on to bang for the club. So I think I'm going to put him in pretty good. I think he's, again, like Dougie Freedman, one of the more consistent managers that we'd had over this sort of 2010s period, which is exactly what we needed at the time, by the way. And did again bring in some good players despite bringing in some absolute dross as well. And I think pretty good is probably where he falls alongside the other two more consistent managers we've had during this sort of very strange 2010s that Forest had. So Aitor Karanka would then be sacked during the 2018-19 season and replaced by Champions League winning player Martin O'Neill, an absolute legend of the club, someone with a huge amount of credit in the bank, but an absolute disaster in my opinion as Nottingham Forest manager. I can remember distinctly his appointment. I was here in Manchester, I was walking around the Arndale, and I got one of them sort of Sky Sports notifications saying that he'd been appointed until the end of the season. And I can remember being really disappointed. I felt like there was a huge opportunity to really build on a really decently talented core of players acquired under Aitor Karanka, and I thought Martin O'Neill was exactly the wrong kind of appointment. He'd just left the Republic of Ireland as manager, where he hadn't even qualified them for a major tournament. He then had, prior to that, his previous club management job was in 2013 at Sunderland during one of their worst spells in the Premier League. I think the fact that he's got some credit in the bank prevents him going in pub team manager, but he does go in bad. I've never been a fan of Martin O'Neill as a manager anyway, and I think he was a guy who had not managed a club side in over half a decade, and it just really didn't mesh well, and I think was exactly the kind of appointment we should have avoided after sacking someone as consistent as Aitor Karanka. We're now moving into our final few managers, starting with Sabri Lamouchi. Wow, this was the best I've ever felt as a Forest fan. The period we spent, that good season we had under Sabri Lamouchi where we finished 7th. We were pretty consistently playing for the playoffs that entire season. I remember up towards Christmas we were in the automatic spaces alongside Leeds and West Brom, obviously under Marcelo Bielsa and Slavan Bilic respectively. We did sort of drop off after Christmas. There was definitely an element of us riding our luck slightly. I think a big part of it was the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. We sort of went into that sort of on a bit of a slump in form, and the period of the season spent after the resumption of league football was where we just fell off the wagon completely. We started that I think in like 4th or 5th, and we just couldn't get a win to save our lives. Unfortunately, in the subsequent season he would be sacked after the first 4 games. He was yet to pick up a win at the time of being sacked that season, and for me that's the only reason he drops down into pretty good. I was going to put him in elite if he'd just left after that season. If he'd gone to like Watford or something like that afterwards, would have stayed in elite for me, because that was the best I've ever felt as a Forest fan. There was some real good, feel-good feeling at the club at the time. We actually felt for the first time in probably a decade like we could actually get promoted to the Premier League. Our penultimate manager is Chris Hughton, the man who would replace Sabri Lamouchi. He'd last pretty much about a year. He would play out the remainder of the 1920 season and would be sacked after 7 games of this season played. After the heights of Sabri Lamouchi's era, where we were never exactly a prolific team, but we were a good team, we were a solid team, to go from that to Chris Hughton's very boring, I would say, defence-first style of football, that 4-2-3-1, which was so rigid and just didn't allow for any creativity or imagination whatsoever, was huge polar opposites if you ask me. We did actually have the 5th best defensive record last season, conceding just 45 goals, which is less than a goal a game, which, considering we lost all 4 of our opening games of that season, I would say is pretty impressive. That being said though, we did also only score, I think it was 36 goals that entire season, which is less than a goal a game, which just like, it speaks volumes. We were so boring to watch last season. Overall though, Hughton did exactly what he came in to do. He was solid in mid-table other than his pretty poor start to this season, was never really in threat of relegation during that season he had. And I would say he goes in Meh. Probably the bottom of Meh behind Stuart Pearce, but definitely a run-of-the-mill average championship stint for Chris Hughton, I guess, if that's even a barometer for it. The final manager of the video, the current manager of Nottingham Forest at the time of recording at least, Stevie Cooper, the man who has revolutionised Nottingham Forest alongside Dane Murphy. He took over the club after 7 games this season with us rock bottom of the championship table, looking destined to be in a relegation fight this season, and the transformation we have gone under since his appointment is incredible, and I genuinely don't think you can overstate how good a job he has done as Forest manager. Just for context, if the championship started when he was appointed Forest manager, we would currently be 3rd in the table with the best defensive record in the league. That is how good he has been for Forest. Combine this with the fact that we've beaten Arsenal and Leicester City in the FA Cup, one of which was the holders of the cup this season, and absolutely trounced Derby County in the East Midlands derby under Steve Cooper. He has had an incredible run so far as Forest manager, and I have no reservations or anything putting him in the elite tier of Nottingham Forest managers. In my sentient periods I've spent as a Nottingham Forest fan, he is the best manager we have had. He is incredible. He's just so... He's everything you want in a manager. He promotes youth. He plays good football. He's something a little bit different. He's good with the fans. He's personable. He's always at the fan forums, always interacting with the fans and the board and everyone. He's just fantastic. So there we go. There is our tier list of Nottingham Forest coaches from 2010 to current. Let's go through them tier by tier. In elite, we have Stevie Cooper. In pretty good, we have Sabri Lamouchi, Billy Davies, Dougie Freedman, and Aitor Karanka. In Meh, we have Sean O'Driscoll, Steve Cotterill, Stuart Pearce, and Chris Hughton. In bad, we have Alex McLeish, Mark Warburton, and Martin O'Neill. And in pub team manager, we've got Philippe Montanier and Steve McClaren. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Where would you rank each of these managers? I will leave this tier list for you to do in the comment section and in the description of this video, so you can go do it yourself. Link it to me on Twitter, link it to me in the comments. I will check it out and we can discuss, and I can tell you why Steve Cooper is the best manager we've had in recent memory. With that being said, thank you so much for watching. It's been a bit of a longer video, a little bit more off script than I normally do. If you did enjoy it, don't forget to drop a like down below and subscribe to the channel, and let me know if you want to see more of these tier lists in the future and suggest maybe a couple I could get into in the next few weeks. With that being said, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely week. I will see you on Friday for the Sheffield United game. I will see you later.